Good morning, students. This is Smita Nandi, Assistant Professor, Graduate College. Today I am uploading a lecture for students of SEM 3, Core 7. The topic of my lecture is Characteristic Features of Renaissance and Elizabethan English. An innovation in English vocabulary came with the revival of classical scholarship known as Renaissance. The English Renaissance roughly covers the 16th and the early 17th century and is often referred to as the Elizabethan era or the Age of Shakespeare, after the most important monarch and most famous writer of the period. The additions to English vocabulary during this period were deliberate borrowings and not the result of any invasion or influx of new nationalities or any top-down decrees. Latin, and to a lesser extent Greek and French, was still very much considered the language of education and scholarship at this time, and the great enthusiasm for the classical languages during the English Renaissance brought thousands of new words into the language, peaking around 1600. A huge number of classical works were being translated into English during the 16th century, and many new terms were introduced where a satisfactory English equivalent did not exist. Words from Latin or Greek, often via Latin, were imported wholesale during this period, either intact, for example, words like genius, species, militia, radius, specimen, criterion, scholar, apparatus, etc., or more commonly slightly altered words, example, horrid, pathetic, illicit, pungent, frugal, anonymous, dislocate, explain, excavate, meditate, adapt, enthusiasm, absurdity, area, complex, etc. A whole category of words ending with the Greek-based suffixes "-is" and "ism" were also introduced around this time. Sometimes Latin-based adjectives were introduced to plug lexical gaps where no adjective was available for an existing noun, that is Germanic noun, example, marine for sea or pedestrian for walk. Or sometimes where an existing adjective had acquired unfortunate connotations, example, equine or equestrian for horsey, aquatic for watery, or merely as an additional synonym, example, masculine and feminine in addition to manly and womanly, paternal in addition to fatherly. Several rather ostentatious French phrases also became naturalized in English at this juncture, including vis-a-vis, sang-froid, etc., as well as more mundane French borrowings such as etiquette, etc. Some scholars adopted Latin terms so excessively and awkwardly at this time that the derogatory term inkhorn was coined. The term inkhorn was coined to describe pedantic writers who borrowed the classics to create obscure and opulent terms, many of which obviously have not survived. For example, some inkhorn terms include revoluting, ingent, divulgate, attemptate, fatigate, etc. Sidney Smith was one of the writers of this period with a particular penchant for such inkhorn terms, including gems like mastigophorus, plumigerus, suspirus, etc. The so-called inkhorn controversy was the first of several such ongoing arguments over language use which began to erupt in the salons of England. Among those strongly in favor of the use of such foreign terms in English were George Petty, Thomas Eliot, and some who were strongly against it were Thomas Wilson and John Cheek. However, it is interesting to note that some words initially branded as inkhorn terms have stayed in the language and now remain in common use. For example, dismiss, disagree, celebrate, encyclopedia, commit, industrial, dexterity, superiority, external, exaggerate, capacity, mundane, etc. An indication of the arbitrariness of this process is that the word impede survived while its opposite, expede, did not. Commit and transmit were allowed to continue, while demit was not. Disabuse and disagree survived, while disaccustom and disacquaint, which were coined around the same time, did not. It is also sobering to realize that some of the greatest writers in the language have suffered from the same vagaries of fashion and fate. Not all of Shakespeare's many creations have stood the test of time, including Barkey, Brisky, Conflux, Unhair, Cadent, Abruption, Implosive, etc. So we can see that many of the terms which were termed as inkhorn terms did not survive. I will continue with this lecture, that is, my next part will be uploaded later.